Welcome back to the V.T.P. We're in the home stretch now, so buckle up as we tackle the last generation of this episode.
After a long road, we come to the last and current generation of the series, Generation 8, which initially takes place in the sprawling Galar region. The status quo of gym leaders and the like returns to this region, but the challenges are greater as a result of the Wild Area, a massive piece of land where wild Pokémon roam freely in the grass and can be encountered as such on the field, where random encounters can be found at the same time. Here we are tasked with defeating the 8 gym leaders of the region and winning a tournament at game's end in order to be crowned the champion of the region, all while dealing with the antics of Team Yell, player allies, and the secret work of Macrocosmos in its attempt to harness the power of Eternatus to preserve the flow of energy in the region within human civilization. This generation also marked the introduction of new content after the main game in DLC, as well as an entirely new type of game in Legends Arceus, and has effectively set the stage for development and future enhancement of the series on a main home console, the Nintendo Switch. And with the way it is shaped up, it has likely been just a taste of what the system can really do, and will likely be explored in the upcoming 9th generation. Wycombe. The Wycombe is the successor to the Festival Plaza that was introduced in Generation 7, and shares with that iteration many of the basic features that existed in similar systems before. As such, the Wycombe serves as Generation 8 stand-in for these previous systems, and allows for trading and battling between different players, as well as other basic services outlined in previous models. As far as all that goes, it's pretty basic, and lacks many of the more diverse features that the Festival Plaza once held, though it does have one major advantage in that it can provide news and even invites to potential raids held by players elsewhere in the world, and thus serves to connect players in a way that previous iterations could not. Given the succession line though, it is likely that the Wycombe will not be featured in the Generation 9 games, replaced with some other system if the generational pattern established so far is anything to go by. Dynamaxing. Dynamaxing is the major combat gimmick of the Galar region, and is the consequence of the arrival of Eternatus onto the planet. This monster once wielded great power over the land, but in a fierce fight against those sent to protect this world, it was heavily damaged, and this resulted in the scattering of what are known as Galar particles throughout the region, which in turn became the seeds for the Dynamax phenomenon as we know it today. In essence, the Dynamax process allows trainers to use a special device called a Dynamax band to make their Pokémon grow to a tremendous size, which not only drastically increases the amount of HP they have, but also changes their moves to allow them to use powerful attacks unique to each type to wreak devastation upon others or otherwise protect themselves against attack, very similarly to Z moves in a sense. This transformation only lasts for 3 combat turns, but it can still be quite useful in dealing with powerful opponents, even if the process can only occur in specific parts of the game called power spots or inside raid dens. In addition, connected to this is the process of Gigantamaxing, where Pokémon either born with or that acquire what is called the G-Max factor will transform into a special, unique form when Dynamaxed known as a Gigantamax form. And while the appearances might change, what makes them really stand out from other Dynamax Pokémon is their access to a special G-Max move that is unique to them and their type, thus allowing them to make the most of their distinctive attributes to really stomp opponents flat. Given that both the Dynamax and Gigantamax phenomena are connected to the specific lore of the Galar region, however, it is unlikely that this gimmick will transfer over to the next generation, and has similarly proved to be the case, but it at least gave a nice twist to battles in its debut generation, and added in a solid level of strategy and planning out the best time to make use of a Dynamax transformation to devastate the opposition. Removing moves. With the advent of so much content and special features between some of the more recent generations of Pokémon, the metagame has become rather complex, and perhaps a bit cluttered as a result of so many concepts being allowed in play, or at least that's what Game Freak may have thought prior to Generation 8. I say this because aside from eliminating the National Dex feature, more prominently, Generation 8 saw the removal of a great number of moves from the mainline series, with Pokémon traded over with those moves in the repertoire being unable to ever use them in battle. While this didn't necessarily affect the overall gameplay for many casual players, competitive players suddenly found a lot of moves that were once useful in competitive play removed, and in turn, this heavily changed and balanced the metagame. Given that it pretty much made some Pokémon like Tyranitar much less useful in a competitive sense, this was not a popular decision for many, but in Game Freak's defense it also paved the way for many old and new Pokémon alike to have a second chance to really show their stuff on the largest stages of them all, and in turn did a favor for many even as it did disservice to some. Pokémon Camp. Pokémon Camp serve the same general role as its predecessors in Pokémon Me and Pokémon Refresh, and in turn are designed to allow trainers to interact with their Pokémon outside of battle in a cozy, quaint setting. Camps can be set up at most outdoor locations in the Galar region, and can give players the chance to take a break from battling and capturing and whatnot, and instead spend that time interacting with their Pokémon, helping to not only increase the value of factors like friendship and affection, but also even sometimes recruit new Pokémon that might just wander into an existing camp. It stands out from previous iterations, however, through the inclusion of a new stat known as sociability, which effectively measures how willing one's Pokémon are to play with others, and the higher this value is, the more likely they may be to actually attract and bring wild Pokémon into the camp that then might wish to join the player. This factor can be increased by cooking curry, a special staple of Pokémon Camp, with a multitude of different recipes to work with to make the perfect dish for one's own Pokémon. However, it seems that this feature will not be returning, having been replaced with picnics for the upcoming Generation 9, and this may be because it did not have a serious impact on gameplay from the standard of directly aiding player progress, merely being an accessory for fun and casual play. Effort levels. Much as the Let's Go games alter the way that stats were calculated in order to create a unique playing experience for all those that partook in those games, Pokémon Legends Arceus introduced the effort level and grid system as a way to alter the way that players train their Pokémon. Instead of EVs in this game, Pokémon have what instead are called effort levels, which start at between 1 to 3 depending on an equivalent IV stat, and can have these values increase as they are given special grid items for each stat. Higher levels require different, more concentrated grid items, and the values can increase up to a value of 10 in each stat before maxing out. As with the last system that deviated from the norm, this can make Pokémon notably stronger than normal, given that all the stats can be maxed out in this fashion, which helped them to deal with the more intense combat challenges that are found within Legends Arceus. While it was an interesting way to go about changing how Legends Arceus is played, it would result in fairly overpowered Pokémon to some extent, requiring Pokémon Home to recalculate stats in order to make transfers possible between other Gen 8 games, and it's thus a feature that is unlikely to come up again unless another Legends game of a similar cut is made in the future. TRs. TMs and HMs remain as they were in Generation 1 for the most part with little change, but over time HMs were eventually phased out, and TMs were made from one-use items into devices that could be used as many times as one wished to give a move to a Pokémon without trainers having to ever again worry about wasting them if they really needed for a specific Pokémon. However, in Generation 8, this system was added onto with the advent of TRs, or Technical Records. These items work pretty much like how TMs used to work before they were made permanent, and many powerful attacks and techniques are locked into these devices and thus force the issue of choice back onto players. However, unlike most TMs in original form, these devices can actually be obtained fairly easily by completing raid battles, as defeated raid bosses will often leave these devices behind so they can be farmed or at the very least harvested to get the most out of them. This sort of grinding can be worth it for those looking to get the best moves possible on their Pokémon, and it can at least be said that their addition made sense with the link to raid battles and the effort that needs to be put forth to actually obtain them, severely increasing the overall move pool of attacks and techniques available to players and their Pokémon. But given that it now appears that TMs will be made possible to just make on the fly, it is understandable that this experiment, at least in the form it currently exists in, will be retired in favor of us being able to make TMs from scratch with gathered materials. Raid battles. Raid battles are a fundamental aspect of Generation 8 and serve as not only a great way to acquire rare Pokémon and items, but also a great way to bring players together for some fun co-op play of a sort. In essence, a raid battle, which is usually initiated by entering into a raid den on the overworld map, involves 4 players, either real life or as NPCs, taking on a Dynamax Pokémon who has access to a few special skills that make the challenge worth the extra effort to get as many competent players in against them as possible. While in this state, the opposing Pokémon can use both Dynamax moves and moves from their own natural set interchangeably and have the capacity to raise defensive shields either once or multiple times in order to block incoming attacks to some degree, with the damage severely reduced as the attacks slowly knock out strikes from a shield bar that ranges from 2 to 5 hits, with Dynamax move taking off 2 hits per successful strike. When this shield dissipates, it lowers the defensive stats of the target Pokémon, but they can restore these stats in a fit of rage, and once they've gotten angry enough with damage taken, they can execute 2 attacks at once instead of just 1 per turn. Players can only last so long in these fights, as while Pokémon that are knocked out can be fully revived after losing a turn, it also ticks towards a counter that will automatically end the battle in the opposing Pokémon's favor once 4 player or NPC Pokémon have been knocked out in one battle. Thankfully, despite the challenge that is presented, completing these battles not only provides a chance to capture the raid boss once it is defeated, but also often awards valuable resources like rare held items and even TRs. This feature, though tied directly to Dynamaxing, is a format that helps to really bring cooperation to the forefront and helps to ensure that at least someone comes out of a battle with something rare. So the Dynamax phenomenon might be isolated to the Galar region, it has already been seen that raid battles will be returning for the upcoming Generation 9. As such, the entertainment and greater engagement in and incentive for player-to-player interactions within them means that they may be here to stay for the long haul, depending upon how future games are developed and structured. Open world gameplay. For the overwhelming majority of situations, players of the Pokemon games have sort of been locked into only having an adventure pathway that is typically quite linear, with only one way to really complete it. And while the formula can still work today, it has also become a bit tired to some and lacks the active engagement that some players might desire, a chance to just roam the Pokemon world and see what mysteries they can find on their own. Sword and Shield in Generation 8 started the path to this by creating the wild areas, large open spaces where many different wild Pokemon could be found at the exploration discretion of the player. But it still also had structured routes and the like that gave it more of a hybrid feel to it. It wasn't until Legends Arceus that the idea and concept of an open world Pokemon game truly made it into the main series in a more fleshed out form. While the game still had its linear story elements, players could explore the massive wild areas in the game to their leisure once they unlocked it to discover all sorts of secrets rare Pokemon to add to their collection. The appeal of this is easily understood as it grants players the freedom to truly make the adventure their own and much more engaging as a result, to give the choice of where to go and what to do squarely in the hands of the player. It has always been the desire to make the series as engaging and personal as possible, to make every trainer's journey special, much as we mentioned long ago in Generation 1 and how it was designed to make it possible for players to make their own adventures and no one else's. Here, that dream is finally beginning to be realized truly, and with this seemingly expanding even further with Generation 9, it is little wonder that it will help to personalize the journeys of many players and ultimately give the power of choice in nearly all aspects to the players and players alone, just as it was meant to from day one. DLC. Up until Generation 8, new stories and adventures were handled with the release of new games in a generation because everything was based in a cartridge format that couldn't be directly updated with extensive material that wasn't packaged with the game. However, in moving to the Switch, it became possible with Sword and Shield to hop on the bandwagon and include DLC for the series, which started off in Sword and Shield with the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra DLC packages. Not only did this mean that players no longer needed to buy more games in a generation in order to see the full story, but it also allowed for the games to be expanded without having to go through the arduous process of selling them as whole separate packages, instead being piecemeal sets that could be obtained separately or together, and as a whole were just a much more effective and cost-saving measure than older generations could support with their technology. And given that DLC and its benefits have been a part of the greater gaming landscape as a whole for a while, it makes sense for this to be the direction the Pokemon takes into the future, and likely until the end of the series as we know it on current console hardware. Pokémon Home. Pokémon Home is both a successor and parent of Pokémon Bank on the 3DS, and the system works with the same basic functions in mind. This system allows players to transfer Pokémon from Pokémon Bank to the newest games in Generation 8 and beyond, and also allows for free transfer between all the different games within said generation as well. The fact that it is tied to one's primary Nintendo account makes it much easier to use if the console it is attached to is heavily damaged or otherwise rendered inoperable, not to mention it acts now as the primary vehicle of transfer between Pokemon Go and the mainline series. And while it might not do much more than this on console, the mobile version of it also allows for online trading, news functions and much more, thus forming a complete package that is likely to stand the test of time into the future, and serve as the primary way to store and exchange Pokemon between one's own games for a long time, as the series remains on the Nintendo Switch or future compatible devices.
Well, here we are at long last. After a gauntlet of videos, we have finally been given the chance to see all the major gimmicks and steps that have been taken to shape the Pokemon games as we know them in the mainline series. With the journey now complete, we are merely days away from a new region, a new adventure, and a brand new generation, likely filled with its own unique gimmicks and special traits that will come to define it into the future. There's no telling what grand adventures may still be on the horizon, but you can bet that I'll be ready for it here with all of you until we meet the next time here on the V.T.P. Thank you for watching this video. It brings me great joy to be able to speak to you all in the world each and every time we meet like this, to explore the many different facets of both the world of Pokemon as we know it, and the world as we live it, through every adventure we have with Pokemon by our side. If you'd like to, please subscribe, ring the bell and all that jazz, to keep yourself updated on content uploads and other materials of the like. You can also follow me on Twitter if you'd like to know right away when something new is uploaded, and my written works, from which most of this is based on, can be found on DeviantArt. Links to both can be found in the description down below. Remember that the world of Pokemon is a place full of wonder and mystery, and you never know what to expect. So, stay vigilant, keep watch, and always be prepared for the unexpected. Until next time, trainers and friends of all sorts, have a wonderful time.